So I used to believe that if I could just think the right thoughts, that things would just fall into place automatically. And for a while, that kind of worked. And then I hit a wall. And no matter how hard I tried to think my way through it, the wall just stayed there. And what I found on the other side of that wall, I think it's a pretty useful thing to share with you guys. When I was going through my positive psychology training, I came across this concept called the negativity bias. And when I came to really understand what it was, it reframed a bunch of things for me. I think that's important to get into. As human beings, we're not wired to be positive, to think positive. It's just not our default. And it actually makes sense when you come to think about it. Our ancestors way back in the day, they needed to be constantly scanning the horizon for a threat. That bear over there, that crazy saber-toothed tiger, believe it or not, that whatever the danger was on the horizon, that was a way of life. And the ones who were not paying attention to that stuff, they didn't survive. Their ass got eaten by that saber-toothed tiger. And so over millions of years of evolution, our brains got really good at focusing on what's wrong, what's dangerous, what could hurt us, and narrow it on all that negative stuff. And that's incredibly useful as a survival tool, but the problem is, contrary to popular belief, that's not the world we live in anymore. We're not getting chased by saber-toothed tigers. Maybe we're getting chased by our wives or our girlfriends, but our brains, they haven't quite gotten the memo yet. And so we're walking around with this ancient wiring in this completely modern world. And that has some pretty real consequences when you think about it, for how we experience life. I saw this play out in my own life, to be honest. And in a way, it was kind of embarrassing, the story, but I think it's worth sharing. Stories are always interesting to illustrate a point. And I had just given a really important presentation at work, and it went, honestly, genuinely really well. People came up to me afterwards and they said things like, hey, great job, you killed it, sending text messages, G-chats, and things like that. I probably got 10 times more positive feedback than negative, but at the same time, there was this one comment, this one small critique, and it was a minor mistake I made. And you know what? I focused on that one comment. 10 times, I had 10 times more positive feedback, a ton more, and my brain just went straight to that one negative thing, and it stayed there, honestly. And here's what makes it even more interesting. It was at that point I had already learned about this negativity bias. I had literally just learned it, I think, a couple days before, so this really resonated when it happened. And so I understood intellectually what was happening, and still, I could not get that comment out of my mind. I couldn't replace it with a positive thought. I was trying. I was just fixed on it. And that's when something kind of, clicked for me. That's the ceiling, because knowing something is not the same as, being free from it. You can understand the negativity bias all you want. You can try to reframe things. You can tell yourself to focus on the positive, and the mind is still going to pull towards the negative, because the conditioning that we have through those millions of years of evolution are much deeper than those thoughts. All right, so what's actually happening, and why does positive thinking have that ceiling that I just described? I think the best way to actually describe this is an analogy that I came across in my studies that really helped me understand this more than anything else. So picture this, imagine this, the sun shining through a glass of muddy water. Because the water is muddy, the reflection of the sun that comes through it is also muddy. It's distorted, it's unclear. Now, if you start to purify that water and get all that nasty stuff out of there, the reflection, it starts to get clearer. And if the water becomes completely pure, the reflection of the sun comes through perfectly. Now, this analogy is basic, but I definitely think it really helps describe what I'm getting at. And so the sun, what it is pure consciousness. It's that pure creative intelligence, that deepest level of who you and I are. And the water is very simply our nervous system. It's our physiology, all that accumulated stress and conditioning that we carry around day in and day out. And here's the thing, the nervous system, when it's full of stress and strain, which, in this day and age, a lot of us are under a lot of stress and strain, it can only reflect a low level of that pure creative intelligence, which unfortunately means that our thoughts, our perceptions, our ability to see things clearly are all being filtered through this muddy water. And positive thinking, as incredibly valuable as it is, is working only at the level of the reflection. It's trying to change what you and I see. And what it's not doing, it's not purifying the water that it's coming through. And I felt, I felt that when I heard that analogy from Maharishi, I found it really useful to sit with. So the question then kind of comes, you're probably thinking, well, then what actually works? What's on that other side of the ceiling, John, that you're pointing at? And before I get to that, I do want to say something that I think is really, really important to hear. And that is that everyone on YouTube is talking about trying to, feed you something to do. And I think that, that there isn't one size fits all. Every person has a path that's right for them. And my honest suggestion is just to follow your own breadcrumbs, to follow your own intuitions, to try things, chew on what, resonates, swallow what, makes sense, and let the rest of the shit go. Anyway, with that said, that's Phil said, I want to share what's worked for me. Because I'm hoping that it might point you in a direction worth exploring for yourself and to see what works for you. So the practices that that have moved the needle most for me are the ones that work at the level of the work at the level of the nervous system itself, not at the level of the thinking, busy mind, but underneath that. And so personally, I practice for many years, about a decade now, transcendental meditation and a more advanced technique within that tradition called the TM City program, the Transcendental Meditation City program. And what it does is it trains the mind to think and act from the level of pure consciousness, that pure creative intelligence. Now, another tool that I use is the Jose Silva method, specifically a method called the Mirror of the Mind. I absolutely love it. I'm gonna do it later today for something. What I'll do is I'll leave the links in the description so you can check them out for yourself, chew at them, see if they interest you, if they can help you out. Great. Definitely want to point out that I have zero affiliation with them. A lot of the things that I share here, I'm just trying to help, and so no monetary affiliation with them at all. They just really work. These practices are really very different, but at the same time, they have a lot in common, which is why I think basically they work. And they work. They don't try to change the reflection directly. What they're doing is they purify the water. They're working at the level of the root, gradually removing accumulated stress from the nervous system and allowing for a cleaner, a more coherent signal to actually come through naturally. And I think when that happens, something starts to shift. The negativity bias starts to lose its immense grip. And because why? I think it's because you're no longer perceiving through that same muddy water. All right, so now I want to touch upon something I find genuinely fascinating, and that's what's going on in the brain, all those brain chemicals. So when we access these deeper levels, different levels of mental activity, that is, they're associated with different brainwave patterns. So when we're in the normal waking activity, our daily, when our eyes are open and we're doing stuff, the brain is producing what are called beta waves. We're active, we're busy, we're processing things in our brain, and that's beta waves. But as the mind begins to settle, and as we move, to deeper levels in our mind, we move into alpha waves. And this is a quieter, a more relaxed state. And in deeper meditation, particularly when the mind touches the experience of pure consciousness, there's a predominance of coherent alpha waves across the entire brain. It's super cool. Now, what does that mean practically? Let's bring this back to reality, John. So it means that the different parts of the brain, they're starting to work all together simultaneously. And I've given an analogy of a laser in an earlier video, and it's just that. It's the same system as a laser, because it's exponentially more powerful simply by becoming more coherent. And this kind of coherence, it's not something you force through positive thinking. It naturally emerges when you give the mind a way to settle and get it beneath that level of the thinking mind entirely. So here's what I want to leave you with. Positive thinking, it's real. It works. Of course I do it. It's genuinely worth doing, no doubt about it. But the thing is to consider is that it works at the level of the seeds. So choosing better thoughts, planting better intentions, and that obviously matters. But if the soil itself is unstable, if the nervous system is carrying a lot of accumulated stress, those seeds, they don't have the environment they need to grow and actually flourish. And if the root isn't being tended to, the soil, it's going to stay contracted. It's going to stay, like crap. And the filter stays muddy. And that ceiling that I talked about, positive thinking, it stays there exactly where it is. And so the work that actually moves the needle truly isn't always about replacing negative thoughts with positive ones. It's truly about purifying the water that it's flowing through.